Welcome to the command line arguments video. We're going to cover first what command line arguments are and why we use them. Then we'll learn how to use command line arguments in Python. And then I'll give some tips for your homework. So what are command line arguments? Well, they're inputs to our entire program. When we write functions in Python, we have the ability to take in inputs or parameters here. So you should be aware of that. So command line arguments are inputs to our entire program. Now how we provide the inputs to our program is when we run it on the command line. And in fact, this CD into my desktop right here is a command line argument for CD. Change directory wants to know which directory to change into, so we provide that information on the command line. And in Python, we can also take in command line arguments. So this is usually the way we run our program, but we can provide additional inputs into our program right here. So command line arguments are one way to provide input into our function. We already learned about another way called keyboard input, and our last lecture we'll learn about file input, which is another way to provide input into our function. Now, why do we use command line arguments? It's hard to describe right now, but before a mouse existed and we had these nice GUIs with things that we could click on, we had to do all our interactions in a command line or a terminal like this. So if someone wanted to run a program, the program could either ask questions and they could type the answers, or they could create programs like CD where you can provide the input on the command line. And command line arguments are really useful when you're trying to manage a system. So servers don't have a lot of GUIs and stuff like that, but there's a lot of programs on them where you can run programs in different ways by providing command line arguments. So how do we use arguments in Python? Well, arguments are found in the system library, and SYS is short for system. And in the system library, we have access to an array of our arguments right here. So we can run our program right here, and we see the square brackets. Notice we're printing out the arguments. We can see the square brackets with our program name right there being the first argument. So let's try running our program different ways. I'll just type 1, 2, 3 right here, and you can see this array now has our program name, and then it has the other arguments that we added inside of this array. Now, another way that we can import libraries that you learned in the last lecture is from system in import argv right there. And when you do that, you no longer should put the .sys dot in front of it. So this should work the same way as before. Now once we have this array of arguments, we can access it in different ways. So we can index it by our number. So argv 0 right here in between the square brackets, that's going to be our program name. And the arguments are always going to be strings. They won't be numbers. So if we want a number, we have to convert the string to a number. And I'll show you that a little later on. Now the second argument, or the first real argument, because the first one is just the name of our program, the first input that we can actually get will be in position 1 right here. And so we can see we can access each one individually. So if we wanted this one, it would be position 2, and this one would be position 3. Now when we access them individually, we have to be careful, because when our user tries to run our program, they might not put the arguments there. So for example, if they ran this program without giving any arguments, we will see an error right here, and the error isn't very intuitive for the user to know what they did wrong. They'll probably just think my program's broken. So to be able to give out a better error message when they do that, we can check the length of the argument right here, the length of the arguments, and in our case we want to have 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. So if the length of the argument array is less than 4, we'll just print out a helpful message telling them how to use our program right here. So now if I try this again, and I forgot I want this to be 0, not 1. So if we try it this time, we see usage. We should see our arguments.py right here, and then we should have 3 arguments. So this is just a quick little message, and this is kind of what a lot of programs do when you don't provide them arguments. Now we can see that we're still having this nasty error. So what we can do is just exit our program. That way we quit right here and we don't go on and try to access arguments that do not exist. So now when we run it this time, they simply get a nice message saying, well, you need to provide some arguments. For the help message, we just tell them exactly what they need to type on the command line. So they just type Python, the name of our program, and then the arguments that they want to put in. All right, now time to help you on your homework. So what I've done is I've written a function called make square, and we're going to make a square of letters to print out. But right now it's just going to print out this information right here to make sure we're getting the right inputs. Now I have this little check right here. This is the first thing. Well, the first thing my program's going to do is import the system library. Then we're going to define this function but not run it. We just put the function in the recipe box or the function box. And then we're going to check to make sure we have the right arguments, and if we don't, we're going to print out this usage message and quit. Finally, we're going to call the make square function. So let's try running that down here. And in this case, let's say we want to make a 4x4 square with the letter T. And we can see I will make a square with T and a size of 4. Now one issue we're going to have is the fact that our size is a string, not a number. So let's go ahead and turn our size into a number. Just like that. So we just put int with the 2 parentheses around it. Now once we do that, we can't concatenate an integer onto a string, so we better turn it back to a string right here. And again, this is just for debug, just make sure I got something set up and working. So when we run that, we see that I get this sentence, I will make a square with T and a size of 4. So now what we can do is we can take our letter and multiply it by our size. And if we remember, if we take a string and multiply it by a number, it repeats that string that many times. So let's see what this does. And you see that we get the 4 T's. We can decide to use R instead, and now we get 4 R's. We can also change this to 7 and get 7 R's. So to finish up our square, to make it a square, we just need to repeat printing that line out however many times our size is. And now we have 7 lines of R's repeated 7 times. So we make this square. Of course, because of the font, this is going to look like a rectangle, but that's okay. So finally, for your homework, what you have to do is you have to take a width and a height. So it's not just one size to make a square. You can actually make rectangles in your homework. And the other thing you need to do is you need to empty out the middle. So you're only going to leave the border letters here. So just a hint on that, I would just divide it up into 3 separate parts. One part to print out the top, and then one part to print out the middle, and one part to print out the bottom. And then when you print out the middle, you just got to be able to put some spaces in there, and then you'll be left with a hollow box. So good luck on your homework, and thanks for watching.